Okay, everyone, welcome today to Soar.com's webinar. It is October 3rd, 2018. I am your host, Andrew Webb, and we are lucky today to be joined by Annamarie Mann, who has become a dear friend because of a lot of work we've done together. Today, we are going to be talking about something that probably will evoke some strong opinions, and that's probably a good thing. These opinions are probably heavily set based on what we see as strengths and how we see weaknesses. And for many of us, that may mean how we project those things and how clients perhaps perceive them, and especially the myths that they might buy into. And as I talked about those myths with Annamarie, I knew this would be something so many of you would be interested in. As always, today's webinar will be available for all of our pro coaches. It is being recorded and is also being streamed live as well. And remember, this webinar is for you. These webinars we do because we want engagement. We want to learn from you. And so for that, you can easily join in. Please participate by hitting the chat button below and give us the questions that feel natural to you. What I'll try and do is gather those questions as best as I can, and at the right times ask, especially when it's needed. But for now, let me just introduce Annamarie. Annamarie is a workplace consultant who especially loves human development. Now, she worked at Gallup for over 8 years as, and I want to make sure I get this right, as our employee engagement and well-being practice manager. Is that right, Annamarie? Did I get it right?
That is one of the roles I had there. I had a few roles. I worked as a workplace consultant, the employee engagement and well-being practice manager, and then I concluded my career there as our workplace analytics practice manager. So if you look at like the state of the American workplace report that comes from Gallup, or the state of the global workplace report that comes from Gallup, I worked with the team of researchers and writers who were creating those big chunks of insights and research. So loved working there, loved my team, and really appreciate everything that Gallup does for clients and really the world.
That's amazing. How many of us have benefited, especially from that research, that work, and all that we're trying to do as coaches? Annamarie, just so you know, those who are on the webinar, loves to maximize human potential. And let me tell you how I know that that's true. And if you feel like there's maximizer in her themes, you're probably right. For us, we had a project that Annamarie and I worked on just a few weeks ago in which we were writing content for some leaders. And as I began to write content, it was abundantly obvious, and I am so grateful for that maximizer because I kind of put some content out there and I started it, but thank goodness she's the one who finished it, because that's what she does well. And she applies that, I think, in her approach as a consultant. And so when I asked Annamarie, hey, tell me what your themes are, she said, I don't go anywhere without my top 10. And so I'm going to read those to you. She said, these are her top 10: relator, maximizer, learner, strategic, achiever, connectedness, futuristic, ideation, self-assurance, and arranger. So Annamarie, I'm going to start there. Tell me why it's so important to you to carry those top 10 as opposed to what traditionally is just the top 5.
Well, I'd like to blame my maximizer, but it was actually an experience, so maybe I can blame both. But when I first started at Gallup, it was wonderful because I took the Clifton Strengths Finder, and it was funny because I'm very introspective, and I've thought about who I am for my whole life, and then this assessment comes up and tells me who I am, and 45 seconds after I take it, and I'm thinking to myself, where have you been all of my life? But the beautiful thing is I had a coaching session, and in that coaching session, a very good friend and colleague of mine was giving me my feedback. And she was spot on in so many ways, but there was a piece of me that I just felt she was missing or was missing in some of the feedback she was giving me, and in the way that people would view me. And I actually just said, this really resonates, but there's just there's a piece of me that's missing. I don't know what it is, but something feels like it's missing. And she said, okay, I don't usually do this, but I'm going to tell you your next three. And that was connectedness, futuristic, and ideation. And the part that was missing was this focus on moving people, moving society forward, and making sure that we were always contributing to something bigger than ourselves. And that's where that connectedness comes in, that futuristic and ideation. Now, I'm sure there's some people out there who are like, and don't forget that self-assurance, Annamarie, and we love your arranger. But those three really, it made it complete for me, and I could hear my multiple aspects of my character coming through then, and that's what got me over the ledge between, I don't know if this is really getting it all. And then when she gave me those, I thought, there I am.
Wow. What
So
a powerful story.
I won't say her name. She knows who she is, but I just really appreciate her willingness to do that, because it certainly helped me get over the ledge. And it says something about my personality a little bit too, because it's like, well, prove this to me. No, it's not enough. It's not enough just to get part of me. You got to get all of me. And then she did it. And I'm like, okay, you got me.
That is rare. I believe that. So often we have seen clients who embrace the top 5 themes and love it wholly and accept it sometimes or sometimes not. But most often that's the response we'd love to see. But very few do you see those who have such self-awareness to say, oh, you're missing a little bit here. That's rare, I believe.
Well, again, if I'm going to place blame someplace, I moved almost every year of my life. And so I had to do a lot of reflection about who I was every time I moved. I'll save that story for another time. So I became very familiar with, unfortunately, my voice, because when you move a lot, you don't know a lot of people at first. So you're on your best friend.
Well, let's talk about your voice. I think that you have found a unique and distinct voice that is so important for coaches today. And we're going to get real. That's our intent today, is to get real about strengths and the W word, weaknesses, something that we should learn to really embrace, especially because of the myths that clients buy into. When we talked earlier, one of the things that you mentioned that I believe is so important and that a lot of people believe is that all weaknesses are treated equally. And that leads to some problematic responses. Talk to us about why that is.
Well, I first want to really preface the reason I have this voice is because I believe wholeheartedly in the mission that coaches have. And they're really driven by this purpose to help other people, help maximize, and help humans develop, really. And so that's why I have the voice that I do, and why I don't shy away from some of the obstacles and barriers that people say to me when I say, well, I believe in strengths-based development. And to your point, with weaknesses, what I hear very often from people who hesitate with strengths-based development is that, oh, well, you say that you don't have to focus on weaknesses at all. That's not what Gallup says, and that's actually not what strengths-based development is about. There's different types of weaknesses, so I think we've got to start there. So first, there's your lesser themes, which some people consider their weaknesses. Now, our lesser themes on our strengths report, our full 34 report, that does speak more to our personality, our unchanging ways. And if you're trying to change who you are at your core, yes, that's not where you're going to get maximum performance. But there's also a type of weakness that's more about your job. And that's about maybe your skills, your knowledge, or your experience that you have. And that could also be seen as a weakness. And so it's really important to be able to differentiate that when you're talking about somebody's weakness, or maybe an area of opportunity for development, are you talking about their personality? Are you talking about something that's really you don't or don't want to and can't change? Or are you talking about just a need to develop some skills or knowledge or gain more experience in a particular area? Those are two different things, and something that commonly gets combined when we're talking about strengths-based approaches.
And what approaches have you seen coaches sometimes follow in both of those areas, and what's the impact?
Well, I think what I hear mostly from coaches, and sometimes in the rhetoric around strengths, is you don't want to focus on your strengths because, right. I'm sorry,
Weaknesses.
hello, no,
Right.
weaknesses. You don't want to focus on your weaknesses,
right.
Because that's going to be very fruitless. Well, in that rhetoric, because that's the tone that we set over and over again, a lot of times we miss the conversation as coaches to say, but is this a skill deficit? Is this just an area where you need more knowledge, or is this an area that you need more experience? And I don't hear us as coaches talking enough about that level of effort that it takes to develop your strengths and really to offset sometimes some of those lesser themes that you have. So we weigh very heavily on all the strengths and positive part of it, which we should.
Right.
But the message it sometimes sends to others is, oh, well then don't even need to focus on that weakness.
I have seen that. For whatever reason, and I can gather some reasons why, but we're so trepidatious to even discuss at times the W word. And weaknesses are a part of this journey, I believe. We need to embrace the fact that it's a part of this journey, at least being aware and, like you have said, understanding where skills and experiences and investment needs to take place.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Tell me somebody who, or maybe you've seen in your own experience, somebody who's addressed that well, and what kind of experience or result happened as they really brought to surface the weakness side.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll just be transparent about myself. When you look at my top 10, I only have 2 relationship building themes, which is relator and connectedness. And so those don't transfer well to having to be in new situations over and over and over again. I also have low adaptability, like in my bottom 5. So when I did my strengths, my husband said to me, gosh, I'm really surprised you're that low in adaptability. And I'm like, well, I've had to kind of leverage my strengths in order to overcome my lack of adaptability. I mean, I like clarity. And so what I learned to do is think about, okay, how can I leverage my relator and my maximizer and my learner together? So when I go into a relationship, I think about, who are you as a person? What do I want to learn from you? And how can I maximize this experience? A lot of times that comes across as woo. And then I think I leverage my strategic, my futuristic, and my ideation to create sort of a web of options. And that looks like adaptability. And so what I would say, and I'm not trying to be braggadocious by any means, but it took a lot of work. I mean, I had to overcome a lot of internal angst that I felt about constant change and figure out, how do I do this? And I had to learn. I had to learn through experience. I had to learn by being open about who I am and not trying to do it a different way. And then I got my master's degree in communication, so I understood people better. But it worked.
Right.
At least I hope it worked. If any of you know me out there, I hope that you feel that it worked too.
So there's a friction that sometimes we're trying, or too often perhaps we eschew, if it doesn't feel like it's part of our natural thinking, feeling, and behaving. And I've seen this where leaders who are very in tune and attuned to their themes are unwilling to go beyond. And they've created for themselves that own place, that own box. They've labeled themselves, and as a result, they've minimized their opportunities for growth and development. Have you seen that as well? And where does that come from?
Well, I think it comes from our natural, we're all sense-making creatures. We want to make sense of the surroundings around us. And so I think it comes from not a bad place. I think people really love to learn about themselves, and it comes from them really wanting to grow personally. Now, what I think we run into some obstacles. So just for everyone out there, I'm going to keep throwing up some obstacles and barriers so that we can navigate around them. But we have to be careful of the egocentric place we put ourselves in, where we're only then thinking about ourselves. one of the challenges in strengths-based development is it's a beautiful individual development tool. It's also a really good collaboration tool and a team building tool if you're willing to learn more about what's not within your top 5. So they limit themselves from a growth and development standpoint by not learning about these other themes, because people on their team and people that they're leading have those themes. And so they're limiting their interpersonal dynamics growth. They're limiting their ability to make a broader impact if they just focus on their top 5. Now, it's a great place to start. You know, Andrew, that's a lot to consume. I mean, so I'm not suggesting don't start with your top 5. I mean, start with your top 1 if you're having trouble, right? Or just start with one that resonates. So we're all moving forward with a different pace. But as coaches, it's really good to always, when you've got someone who's ready to go that next level, to know when to go that next level and to know when to say how this is going to impact them from their interpersonal dynamics and how it will impact their team dynamics as well.
How do you know when they're ready to go to that next level as a coach?
Well, I think one, you have sort of a willingness, right? But I think when they show proficiency in their top 5, where they show an appreciation for who they are. Some people are also just natural learners and have input, right? So sometimes it's just that helps. I would say another cue for me is sometimes when they're hesitant to adopt their top 5. And maybe they're actually showing resistance. And so sometimes it's nice to say, I would like you to pick somebody else, and we're going to focus on their strengths. And then they almost become more open through strengths by learning about it through other people. So sometimes it's a level of mastery on their own. And sometimes it's that resistance where you teach them about someone else that then they become more open to their own top 5.
That is a fabulous concept, to at least get them to be so, because we know that introspection can be taxing. And then perhaps to maybe project it on to somebody else where they may be a little bit more inclined to help and be receptive in any way. I love that. That's fabulous.
Well, and they may be like resistant to labeling. I know, again, when I first joined Gallup, I have a podcast with Becky Hammond tomorrow that will be live. And
cool.
I think I said in the podcast that when I first started at Gallup and I had my strengths, I felt psychologically naked. Like everybody was assuming stuff about me that I'm like, wait, I haven't told you anything yet. And a lot of people were already assuming a lot of things about me. And that can be uncomfortable for some of us. So that's a barrier sometimes where people are like, I don't really want people to know this stuff about me. But I quickly learned the power of taking a strengths-based approach. And even for someone as introspective as I am, wow, it gave me a language to communicate with others that I hadn't had before in my life.
And I've heard you say that before, and this is probably an interesting point. There is a distinction between strengths and a strength-based approach. Talk to me about what that means.
Well, again, we conflate those a lot. So strengths, or Clifton strengths, it's just a report of your talent themes. So your natural way of thinking, behaving, and feeling, which I'm sure everybody on this webinar already knows and recognizes that, okay? But just because you have a report doesn't mean you're taking a strengths-based approach. So cultures or clients or even individuals, parents, even maybe there's some of you who are just parents out there, we can know our children's or our teammates or our peers' strengths from an assessment standpoint, but it doesn't mean we're taking a strengths-based approach. When we're taking a strengths-based approach, that means we're using it for personal development, we're using it for professional development, and we're really leveraging that in how we work together. The other thing that gets overlooked sometimes in a strengths-based approach, and forgive me for saying it, is there's a lot of companies out there who can use strengths-based approaches without a Clifton StrengthsFinder assessment.
Ah!
Yeah, don't say it. Yeah. It's my personal favorite, but I know other people have other personal favorites. But what we mean by that is it's also celebrating somebody's successes and what they're doing well on the job. So that is also a strengths-based approach. So it's not enough to say you have discipline, so I need your focus on this project. A strengths-based approach says, I'm going to place you on here because we need your discipline. And then I'm going to continue to not only celebrate or recognize when you've done something well, I'm going to do it in a way that doesn't say, I love your discipline. It's going to move beyond strengths identification to more recognition of that success and acknowledgement of the successes that they've had on the job. So,
in many ways, that's a great technique to transcend the label impact, perhaps, that they're only their themes, which, let's be honest, it's very easy even for coaches to fall into that trap, that you are your themes. And I think if you're, like you mentioned, that's a fabulous technique to find methodologies that perhaps transcend just the theme label and acknowledging successes, great work, that positivity that we are all so aware of. And so few managers and leaders know how to use in a beneficial way.
And it really takes them, one, knowing them, right? Awareness and understanding is just the first step, but it also then takes learning about them. And then it also takes then an appreciation and the ability to see it in other people for good management to happen. Because managers, especially in leaders, we need them to be able to spot it, recognize it, and when I say recognize it, I mean verbally recognize it in other people for it really to continue to develop. It's just like an athlete, like when you see an athlete doing something well. I'm a big Broncos fan, and Peyton Manning was...
We just lost half of our audience.
Oh yeah, right. Sorry about that. I know. I always worry when I tell people what football team I like. I think they're pretty neutral. I don't think too many people hate the Broncos.
No.
Hopefully. But I remember when they had Peyton Manning, and we could have thought about like how Peyton Manning was a little long in the tooth for a quarterback, but we focused on what he did well, and we built up that offensive line to protect him and not, to protect this older quarterback who, went on to win a Super Bowl for us. So not too shabby. Now the Broncos did lose the other day, and that's another strengths-based
whole other
approach.
story.
Yeah, right. If you watch Monday Night Football, I didn't like the conclusion of that one.
There's these leaders then who can approach their organization with this practice, these techniques, these leadership methods. Why is it so hard for them sometimes to do that, even with or without the Clifton assessment, the Clifton Strengths Assessment?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different reasons, right? So I'll just speak to some of them. One, just think about the way we were raised. I mean, when we're raised, the way that we develop as human beings is our parents are usually pointing out to us what we need to fix. Here's where you need to be respectful. This is what you need to do. I have two boys, a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old. And mind you, I try to remind myself constantly to tell them what they're really good at, right? But we try to protect our children, and we try to help them succeed in the world. And to do that, our minds are hardwired to look for what are the things that might be dangers to them, whether or not that's personality traits or whether or not that's actual actions. My youngest son has low situational awareness, gets hurt all the time. So as a parent, we're protecting them. And then again, I think out of the kindness of sometimes our hearts, when we really care about somebody and we think something's standing in the way of their success, we want to let them know. So we're hardwired, both from a development and behavioral standpoint, and then also through experience, to focus on those things that are cautions for people. Because, they'll do what they do well naturally anyway. So I just don't think we were raised that way. And I think that's very difficult sometimes. I think the other reason that, I'm sorry, I was cutting you off.
Please go.
I would just say one other reason that sometimes leaders hesitate is they fear that because you take a strengths-based approach, some of the people in their organization will say basically, oh, good, I'm not good at that. So I'm going to, I'm not good at execution skills, so I don't need to actually do this project. I don't actually need to hit my milestone. So I think there's also a hesitation that people will misuse the tool, and I would say that it happens often. So they have some credibility in their fears.
I think that is, honestly, what you're just talking about is the crux. These seem to be the massive myths that perhaps we're contributing to as coaches, and either we aren't adjusting or helping change the mindset of leaders and those who may have taken the assessment, or they're naturally falling into that trap or closure of their willingness to learn. And I've seen that, and I'm sure you have. And I think those myths or those barriers come up often for coaches as they talk to people about this approach often.
Mm-hmm.
How do you assuage those concerns with a potential client?
You take a strengths-based approach. No, so here's how you would do that. So here's how I would do this.
Great.
I'm very individualized here. So the first thing is what is their, you know how you have love languages in a relationship and in a person? Well, what's the persuasive language of that leader? Okay, so first, a lot of times it's business outcomes. I need to know that taking a strengths-based approach is actually going to help us with our profits, with our bottom line. So I think being very aware of the data that Gallup has available, the meta-analysis that they've conducted around strengths-based approaches is a great tool for you. If you don't have the meta-analysis, you can go on Gallup's site and get their strengths meta-analysis. And what that is that it's a collection of studies that Gallup conducted looking at teams who use strengths-based development approaches. And there's a clear connection between when they leveraged a strengths-based approach versus years after, the improvement in customer engagement, the improvement in employee engagement, the improvement in profits, and then the decrease in turnover and the decrease in safety incidences. That's a hard word to say out loud, I'm realizing. So I think you need to be able to speak that language, first of all. The second thing I think we need to be able to do, because again, coaches, I've been there where we're sitting in front of an executive team and they're like, well, this seems like too much work. Well, there's also, well, you could keep doing it your current way, and that's where you want to take what are you currently doing and comparing that to a strengths-based approach. And so that's where I think showing kind of what the stages of adoption are really important. You know, when you go to commitment, you just don't do awareness and then stop there. What you need to do is show a path to a leader of how you will get to that level of commitment and maximization around a strengths-based approach, and not just stop with awareness building. So I think, again, using data is really important. I also think being upfront with, here's what awareness is going to get you, and then here's what additional coaching will get you, and then here's what embedding it into an onboarding program will get you. And creating that path also sets really clear expectations. We're not promising the world by just giving strengths-based coaching or strengths-based report, right? We're not going to promise you those profits. You're going to have to commit to a few additional steps. And so I think laying that out is important. I think it's honest. It's transparent with a leader and says, I hear you, and here's how we'll address that.
Oh my goodness, managing those expectations with ultimate clarity. We talk about it perhaps often, but I love that you can be honest. Here are the results you know you can get, but to get here, here are the things that will have to happen. They'll thank you for it. I totally believe that.
Yeah, and you don't set yourself up then for a promise you can't keep. And the beautiful thing about the strengths meta-analysis, and I know the scientist who did that, I worked with him, he's a fabulous guy, by the way, really funny. They have ranges on it. Like you get and I don't have all the numbers memorized, but let's say you get a 7% to 20% boost in customer engagement. And somebody said, wait, why the range? It's because we studied organizations who just did awareness, And we also studied organizations who adopted it in their culture. And the range came in when they adopted it into their culture and created strengths-based approaches and didn't just do an assessment. That's where we start to see a range. And it's the same thing like with employee engagement. You can measure employee engagement, and just knowing where you are will give you a little motivation to take action, but making a commitment to take action, that's different.
Boy, that's good to know. That's a fabulous insight. I want to talk about one more myth perhaps that we ourselves or even clients fall into, and then I'll leave it open. Any more questions as well for you in the group, please write in. This has been so informational, but as well, I think really applicable. This isn't just good information. This is stuff we can do today. So one of the things we discussed earlier as we were talking is another myth that so often we believe is that I have X strength, therefore I must be good at X or Y. Why do we believe that, and what's the best way to probably adapt that to a more conducive and constructive approach?
And this is one I think that it's really important for coaches to understand and to appreciate. So because something is high in terms of a talent dimension for you or in a talent theme, it doesn't mean that you're proficient in it. So a strength, I think the label strength in itself, you know, like it makes you think you're really strong and therefore you don't need any more development around it. And we're all aware of basements and balconies around, and if you're not aware of basement and balconies around strengths, I encourage you to learn more about it. But a basement is really where your strength may be showing up in unproductive ways for you. And then your balcony is when it's applied in a way that helps you achieve your goals. You know, I would layer on that there's also mastery, where with skills, knowledge, and experience, you can move beyond the balcony even to mastery. The problem that we face, I feel bad talking about all these problems, right? But I want everyone to, again,
we need a healthy dose of it every now and then. I swear we do.
I know.
It's okay.
What
It's
goal
okay.
am I on? So I think the challenge, though, that we face is I've had many people take a strengths assessment and say, for instance, oh, look, I'm high in communication. That must mean I'm an effective communicator. No, that means you use a lot of analogies, you like to talk. It doesn't necessarily mean that you do that in an effective way. Or I'm high in strategic. I'm really good about thinking about the future. I'm really proficient in this. So a strengths theme should not be confused with proficiency. It is not a selection instrument. It is a development instrument. And I think where we get in trouble as coaches is we encourage organizations to hire people off of their strengths. You need to make sure that that person has the skills, the knowledge, and the experience to do the job. And I really like how Angela Duckworth talks about in her book, Grit. She talks about talent being one component of achievement, but that effort counts twice. So you have to be able to apply that effort to learn more about it in order for it to actually be developed. And you can see this in children everywhere you go. I talk about it with my children all the time. Like when I see my kids growing up, they have high competition. Well, if that competition is counterintuitive or preventing them from actually achieving the goals they want to achieve, well, in that case, then they're likely not applying that competition in a good way or in a productive way for themselves. So it's really important that we don't recommend that you put people on a team just because they have strategic. Again, it doesn't mean that they're proficient at it.
And that is something so easily leaders fall into, and especially if they're just learning about this, they want to try it, their intent is pure. It's so easy to assume, here are your 5. Hey, this is a problem we've got. This matches up. Perfect. We got it solved.
Which you should always have follow-up conversations. Now, that's not to say they may actually be really proficient, you know, in those areas. But you need that follow-on conversation, or you need to be able to back that up through their experience again, or perhaps some of the knowledge or skills they're able to apply to a situation.
Okay, so I'm going to ask this question, and I love Rick has just asking it, this is perfect. He's saying, Annamarie used the term personality several times, which is important. Is she saying that Clifton Strengths is a personality assessment, which could be a loaded term? That's different than what I was taught. So talk to us about, is this a personality assessment, Clifton Strengths, and how does that perhaps differ than other strengths assessments?
I think that is a loaded question, and I don't think we would call that actually a personality assessment. We label it as and I left Gallup, so I shouldn't say we, but I still feel like they're my family.
Of course.
But it is an assessment of your natural way of thinking, behaving, and feeling, and those are called your talent themes. I use personality a lot, more for the sake that I think I try to use language that people can resonate with and not be too scientific in my approach to communicating. And I don't think it really, I guess for some it might lead to some misinterpretations of what I'm saying, so I apologize for using that so frequently. I tend to revert back to, okay, what's going to resonate most with an audience, and I go to personality, but really it's a talent theme of how you naturally behave, think, and then feel.
So you can tell that this is loaded. The term is just, there's so much, and I'll be honest. For example, Soar very soon will be releasing a number around 100 of the top assessments out there beyond just Clifton Strengths. And I want to tell you this, tagging those and telling you if it's personality or team development or leadership development, it's headache central. It is so difficult, and each of them have their different areas of focus, research. There are different approaches in psychometricians and all of it comes into play. And so trying to categorize it, a lot of it is somewhat subjective based on the use of the tool. So I think it's a loaded term. That's interesting though. You see that there's quite a bit of comments about this as a personality assessment.
And what I would really recommend that you do, because I'm not the lead chief scientist of strengths, again, in the spirit of transparency, I look more at the application of it. And we have, or Gallup has scientists that study this from inside out, right? And they know all of the different assessments out there. If you want to make sure to represent it accordingly, I would say exactly, like, go to Gallup and say, look at exactly how they describe it. But I saw a few of the comments come through. I'm not looking at them, but I can see a little bit of the comments where someone says, why call it a performance tool or a development tool? It really is it's meant to be a development tool. The key thing I would say is make sure you're not substituting it for a selection tool. A selection tool looks at more of the hiring needs of a job and the job demands, and it matches more like proficiency and what do they call it? The degree to which somebody shows up like that on a day-to-day basis. And again, even those selection tools are designed in very different ways as well. So, but I'll leave those to the IO psychologists. So.
Oh my goodness, thank goodness. Yeah, that is a fabulous way to kind of wrap up. There's some complexity here, but there's also, we've spent quite a bit of time now, Annamarie, talking about some of the stuff that isn't getting covered as much. One of the things I'd love for you to maybe perhaps end with as we kind of close up this webinar is how strengths, you, given your unique background with Gallup and as a highly proficient consultant in the workplace, truly can deliver on the results that we claim they do.
So how can we deliver on those results?
Or how you've seen them deliver on the results that really we claim they'll deliver on.
Well, I think if you want to do it on an individual level, so I'm going to say that there's individual, team, and organizational type of impact that you can have as a coach. And I think it's really important not to underestimate the impact that you're having at all different levels. So when you're coaching an individual person, like, help them understand what their natural way of thinking and behaving and feeling is. that has a huge impact on helping them think about, how do I show up in my relationships? How do I show up at work? And how do I show up to myself? And how do I even think about myself? So I think we need to think about that individual first. Then I would say, if you're a coach, don't underestimate the impact that strengths can have on a team level, because you can help people understand each other better. And then if they understand each other better, they can collaborate more. And right now in the workplace, there is a lot of what's called matrix teams. And what that means is that you have cross-functional teams. Sometimes you have multiple managers, and that can be cognitively stressful on human beings. We're trying to constantly make sense of other people in teams. And so strengths can have a huge impact on helping you sort through the noise initially of how do I best work with you? Gallup has that, and if you all are certified strengths coaches, they have that tool, You Get the Best of Me When. And I love that tool because it helps you appreciate and quickly get to know other people. And then lastly, on an organizational level, being able to say that there's this social contagion impact of strengths. And when I say social contagion, it's like your emotions, your actions are contagious to people around you. And whether or not you're doing a grassroots movement in an organization or a large-scale organizational strengths-based approach, don't forget the organizational impact you have when you teach people and teams to appreciate what's great about each other. And I think that that is what we need a little bit more at work, and maybe a little bit less of the looking for what we don't like about people.
Annamarie, thank you for spending time with us today. What a treat this has been. I just want to recap really kind of the things that we just talked about. And I think we really went over all of these. And I'm going to do it this way. We need to rethink what we consider a weakness and give each type of weakness the right kind of attention. We can't mistake a talent for proficiency. Even our strengths need to be managed. If we don't go beyond awareness, we aren't really creating strength-based approaches. And then lastly, we didn't get as much into this one, but these are all kind of the sum up what Annamarie has talked about today. Leveraging strengths increases business outcomes and engagement, which also drive improvements in retention and other performance outcomes. These are the ideas that Annamarie has really helped us get, I think, far clearer on. And perhaps just maybe it needs to be a subtle reminder or nudge for some of us. I want to thank you again, Annamarie. This has been wonderful. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you all for inviting me, for attending the webinar, and feel free to reach out anytime with questions.
You're amazing. And as well, remember on October 23rd, we will be having our first event with Jamie Libro. This is strength-based selling, which honestly incorporates a lot of what Annamarie has discussed here today. As well, on the 24th, there will be a major launch event, and you'll be receiving more information about that, I'm sure, each one of you. Until next time, we'll see you and continue to uplift humanity. Thank you, each one of you.
Thanks, everyone.